Computer graphics these days are everywhere, but before these stunning visual effects became possible, many crucial developments had to take place. In this series, we'll meet the visionaries who turned science fiction into reality, one groundbreaking innovation at a time. In this first episode, we're traveling back to where it all began, the 60s and 70s, a time when the idea of creating art with a computer seemed almost impossible. This is the story of the people who helped shape the world of computer graphics as we know it today.
The early 60s brought a whole new revolution in technology. It resulted from a breakthrough into the world of the super small, the world of solid logic technology, microelectronic circuits.
Computers in the 60s were drastically different from the computers we know today. At this point in history, the concept of a personal computer did not exist. Computers of that era often filled entire rooms, and they were primarily used by big corporations, government agencies, and universities.
This is a System 360 memory array. 64,000 characters of storage. If you need less, start with the basic 8,000. Need more? Add arrays to provide 128,000 characters of storage, or 256,000. Or 512,000. Compact, fast.
In the late 60s and into the 70s, the primary way to interact with these big, bulky machines was through a terminal. That was just a keyboard and a monitor connected to the central computer. This allowed multiple users to interact with the system by sharing its limited resources. It was under these less than ideal conditions that people began experimenting with computer graphics, pushing the limits of what these early machines could do.
I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what the future would be or why this would be important to do. But it was very interesting work. And every day I did something that hadn't been done before that worked. And that was, reward enough.
Ivan Sutherland is often called the father of computer graphics due to his groundbreaking ideas, innovative software, and mentorship of future industry leaders. It all began in 1963 when Sutherland developed a program called Sketchpad as part of his PhD at MIT. Sketchpad allowed users to create, modify, and manipulate geometric shapes using a light pen on a screen.
I mean that if I point at this particular point and tell the computer to move that point by another push-button command, it will move not only that point, but all three lines that are attached to it.
Sketchpad may look simple by today's standards, but it was a revolutionary piece of software. His work on Sketchpad paved the way for CAD, graphical user interfaces, and modern digital art tools. Even in its early form, many of the fundamental concepts we rely on today were already present. Copying and pasting, zooming in and out, using vectors for infinite fidelity, creating precise shapes out of rough drawings, it was all there. Sketchpad even allowed for basic 3D modeling and manipulation.
There, we have that now. Here we have a single three-dimensional object as seen from four separate views. We have a top view, is indicated by the T here, a front view, and a side view.
Oh, this is the way a mechanical drawing would be laid out, and I gather the other one is a perspective.
Right, with this addition. We can rotate this perspective separately from these three views. You get an idea of what we have here. Now begin to rotate it. You see it's rotating about an axis perpendicular to the imaginary floor. Let's put a roof on this object in this fashion. We'll latch onto that corner, and we'll draw a pyramid.
I can see it from the side view. It's a false front house there.
Right. And I can also distort things, move things, like we can in 2 dimensions. If I latch onto this line here, or let's say this line over here, I can pull that out to the side and distort the object slightly. Now let's see what we've drawn here. We'll rotate the perspective, this view, again.
What a strange looking object.
And now we have a warped house under construction, perhaps.
After Sketchpad, Sutherland decided to team up with his friend David Evans. In 1968, Evans, along with Sutherland, established one of the first academic programs in computer graphics at the University of Utah. The program was a big success, and it managed to produce many influential computer scientists. Henri Gouraud, John Warnock, Ed Catmull, Jim Blinn, and James Clark are just a few of the incredible talents that emerged from the University of Utah. 1968 was a pivotal year. In addition to University of Utah's computer science department, it was also the year Sutherland experimented with the first VR headset. Compared to the relatively compact VR devices of today, this headset looked more like a torture device. Appropriately, it was called the Sword of Damocles. 1968 was also the year Evans and Sutherland was founded and was one of the first companies to focus on computer graphics. Their technology was used in applications ranging from flight simulators to military training. The company remains active to this day.
As these machines became more and more elaborate, and as this kind of a device pointed to programming, I became more and more aware that the real possibilities lay in computer systems. And I was able to show an early film of mine as a demonstration of these mechanical machines, and argue that these mechanical machines all foretold a totally digital and digital system, solid state electronic system.
While many brilliant minds were focused on improving how computers worked and making computer graphics a reality, an artist was already integrating computers into his work. John Whitney, often hailed as one of the pioneers of computer animation, created these abstract animations using analog computers repurposed from World War II military equipment. His analog computer was first used as early as 1958 in Hitchcock's Vertigo for the movie's title sequence and dream sequences. Whitney's work can be seen throughout the 60s in TV logo reveals and animations. In many ways, he was the first motion graphics artist. One of the big challenges at that time was the process of transferring high-quality images from the computer back onto film or video. None of today's workflows existed back then, so the process involved taking pictures of the monitor in a darkened room. That, of course, was one of Whitney's major frustrations because he couldn't exactly capture the clarity and vibrancy he was seeing on the screen. His work, though, inspired many other artists of that era. The VFX legend Douglas Trumbull used Whitney's motion control system in '68 to produce the Stargate sequence for Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. By that time, Whitney had already started working with computers as we know them today, and in 1966, he was awarded an artist-in-residence position at IBM.
But I must say, to get emotionally involved creatively at the computer is not easy. One considerable problem has to do with the matter of real time. Here, the orange figure moves in space while the yellow remains at a constant distance. These actions on the screen were not produced in real time. In fact, it takes 3 to 6 seconds to produce one image such as we see here, passing at the rate of 24 frames per second. One 20-second sequence requires about 30 minutes computer time. Then I must wait some 12 hours or more to see my film after it is processed. Imagine how handicapped a pianist would be if his piano made not a sound as he played on it, and he had to wait some 12 hours before he could hear the music he had performed.
It's interesting to hear Whitney express his frustration with how slow and uncreative working with a computer was back then. While we do still have to wait a long time for things to complete, especially in 3D rendering and simulations, it's amazing to see how much we have progressed since then. Now we have real-time feedback, we can instantly adjust and improve our animation, and we can easily publish our work with a push of a button.
There's two things my Dave can't get enough of.
Meat and potatoes.
Why, Swanson's just made new Hungry Man entrees for guys like Dave.
By the mid-70s, things had progressed enough for people to want to try pushing things even further. This doesn't mean that the computers of that era were powerful, but people were bold enough to give it a try. In 1972, a young Ed Catmull decided to pursue his idea of creating a 1-minute computer-generated animation using 3D graphics.
By chance, I happened to be at the Foundation School for Computer Graphics, and I took a class, and everybody was supposed to make something, and there's some software they had. Now at this time, everything was made out of polygons or quadratic surfaces, and that was it. And they didn't show enough promise, and so I thought what I would do is digitize my left hand.
Hands are very complex organic forms that can bend and twist in all sorts of ways. Artists avoid to draw them, and even nowadays AI models struggle to render them correctly. So you can imagine how much more difficult this task would have been in 1972. But that's precisely why Catmull picked this subject. Back then, rendering curved surfaces was difficult to do. The way Catmull went about creating the 3D model was quite ingenious. He first created a plaster model out of a mold of his own left hand. He then proceeded to draw a wireframe on it to use it as a guide when scanning the model. This wireframe was made out of 350 triangles and polygons. It was a very tedious procedure, and according to Catmull, it took 10 weeks to complete the project. In 1973, he debuted the short at a computer conference. As expected, the animation wowed the audience. No one had seen anything like it before. Even though the rendering and animation is showing its age when compared to today's standards, it was the state of the art for many years to come. It was even reused as a computer screen element on Future World, a movie produced in 1976, 4 whole years after Catmull created the animation. Nowadays we have many different ways of creating something like that. We have many different applications for modeling, rendering, and animating, allowing us to choose applications based on our preference. Let's take as an example modeling the hand. We could use an app like ZBrush that can push millions of polygons and not just the 350 Catmull had to work with, but we can also go the scanning route and get incredible levels of realism for free. Here I'm using a cheap scanner to scan my own hand. Even though this is not how we would actually approach a scanning job of this type, we can still get multiple times better results than what could possibly be achieved in 72. And for higher end results, we could just purchase a scanned model from the internet. These are all things that weren't even invented back then. For example, the first research for the TCP/IP protocol was published in 74, 2 years after Catmull's project. The details we can get with a scan are just mind-boggling. First off, the low subdivision level of the hand is almost 10 times higher than that seen in Catmull's video. And if we go to the higher subdivisions available, the hand alone weighs in at 12 million polys. We can see the individual pores, imperfections of the skin. We can even get a close look of the fingerprints. As for animation, we also have different ways to approach it. We could go the high-end route and capture performance with motion capture gloves, or we could just animate everything by hand. I asked my friend Orestes to rig the hand for me so I can animate it the manual way. In the end, he not only made the rig, but he also created a cool interface that, as he puts it,
προσπαθώντας να φτιάξει κάτι intuitive που να μπορεί να χρησιμοποιήσει μέχρι και ο Δημήτρης.
I can move around individual fingers, and there's even a convenient control to move several fingers at the same time. That certainly makes animation a whole lot easier compared to what Catmull had to deal with back then. We can even use handy features like Cinema's Cappuccino system, which records our mouse movements, allowing us to create a performance in real time. And then there's rendering. Catmull didn't even have the ability to texture his 3D hand, and nowadays we can easily use 8K or 16K textures on top of other incredibly handy features like real-time previewing, subsurface scattering, depth of field, or motion blur. These are all things that were slowly built throughout the years, many years after Catmull's ambitious experiment. Knowing all that, it's incredible to see how much Catmull has managed to achieve in this 1-minute video.
In the early days of computer graphics, when people were trying to figure out how to make pictures of objects at all, the first problem to be solved was how to describe an object to the computer. The simplest way to do that is to just draw it off on graph paper. This is just a cross-sectional view of one half of the object, a simple cup shape. And in order to describe this to the computer, you first number all the points going around the outside rim of the object. Once you've done this, the computer can then spin this around to make a surface of revolution and make line drawing pictures of what it would look like from different views.
Even though Jim Blinn's name and work is only known in the computer graphics industry, his work was pivotal in advancing computer graphics to a broad audience. It laid the foundation for modern CGI in movies and video games.
So the next problem to be solved is called hidden line elimination, where you have the computer know not only the positions of the lines, but the positions of the faces in the object, so that it only draws those lines that are not hidden by some opaque face. Now this sort of a picture looks much more realistic because it has some solidity to it.
In the mid to late 70s, Blinn, like many others in the industry, was a student at the University of Utah. His research in realistic rendering resulted in techniques that are still used to this day. His work at NASA, though, was the one that exposed a wider audience to the power of computer graphics. Blinn produced a series of animations for several of Voyager's missions. His animations depicted flybys of Voyager around Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus, showcasing each planet's unique characteristics. Blinn's work marked a paradigm shift in how NASA communicated with the public. Before his animations, most of the space mission visuals were either static diagrams or artistic renderings. His dynamic animations allowed viewers to experience space missions as if they were aboard the spacecraft themselves. Blinn's animations were not just visually stunning, but also scientifically accurate, which was a hallmark of his approach.
All right, here's my question to everybody. You have 1,000x more compute power, or let's say 100x in 2025. We're now at 1 trillion x. What are you going to do with it?
Alvy Ray Smith's career spans many decades, but it was the 60s and 70s that defined his groundbreaking career in computer graphics. After earning his PhD in computer science, he began exploring the intersection of art and technology. In '74, while at Xerox PARC, he worked on SuperPaint, one of the first digital paint programs, which introduced revolutionary concepts like frame buffers and raster graphics. Smith's contribution was the HSV color space. A few years later, while working at the New York Institute of Technology, Smith co-invented the alpha channel, a fundamental concept for image compositing. Alpha channels are used everywhere. From Photoshop to 3D applications, they remain a cornerstone in digital imaging and video editing software. He later on co-founded Pixar, one of the biggest animation studios in the world, but that's a story for another video. The 60s and 70s were pivotal decades for the development of computers and computer graphics. From Ivan Sutherland's Sketchpad to Blinn's bump mapping and Smith's alpha channels, these pioneers weren't just building technology, they were shaping the future. It's impossible to list all the people who contributed to these achievements. The individuals mentioned in the video represent just a small fraction of the many who played some role in the development of computer graphics. As we marvel at their contributions, I'll leave you with Ivan Sutherland's words.
Where does curiosity come from? It is inherent in youth. Graduate students don't know what can't be done, and so they go ahead and do it. And I didn't know you couldn't make drawings on computers, so I went ahead and did it. If we simply liberate the next generation to permit their curiosity to be exercised and encourage them to do new things, innovation will go on as faster than it's gone now.